Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start with a few introductions, and then if people join through the waiting room, that's totally fine. But welcome, everybody. My name is Kylie Smith, and I'm the training manager here at West Virginia CTSI, Clinical Translational Science Institute. We're happy to have you. And first and foremost, I wanted to say that if you don't already have your name in your actual Zoom box that shows your full name, if you could either rename yourself by clicking the three dots and choosing to rename, or putting your name and email in the chat, that would be super helpful for us for attendance. And then additionally, we are also able to offer continuing education credits to attendees. So if that's something that interests you, please also put your name and email in the chat box, and we'll be sure to get you the continuing education credit form after this. So thank you for that. Without further ado, we have today two guests that are going to be talking about what needs IRB review, navigating rules and processes specific to our WVU IRB. So we have Cassandra Lambert, who is currently the Assistant Director for the Office of Human Research Protections at WVU. She began her IRB career at the University of Colorado, where she served as an IRB review specialist before transitioning to the University of Kentucky to focus on quality improvement, education, and outreach. And one of her fun facts is that she enjoys traveling and has visited over 70 plus countries. So I am very envious. And then we also have Nancy McGill, who is a continuous quality improvement and education coordinator for WVU's Office of Human Research Protections. And she began working with the IRB administration in 2019 at the University of Kentucky after 10 years spent in the cooperative extension, delivering practical research-based recommendations to the public. Her favorite part of her job is helping researchers understand and navigate the IRB review process. And Nancy's fun fact is that she's an avid fiber artist. So in her free time, she likes to knit and crochet and sew and spin her own yarn even. And her favorite project to date is knitting a shawl with a beaded constellation map, which I believe she even has on today.
Correct, I'm wearing it.
Yeah, so without further ado, again, I'll turn it over to them, but keep going ahead and putting your name in the chat box if it's not fully displayed on your Zoom page, or renaming yourself, as well as putting CE credits in the box as well. So thank you. I'll turn it right over to you guys.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction. And today we're going to talk to you a little bit about what needs IRB review, so how you navigate those rules and processes. Just to give you an idea of the content for today, we'll give you an overview of the federal regulatory definitions. We'll talk about some of the IRB requirements, the differences in what we call not research, not human subjects research, and where PI decisions come into play in this process, as well as institutional requirements, which will apply to all types of projects, regardless of their research, not human subjects research, or human subjects research status. And then we'll discuss the current process, which has recently changed and shifted a little bit. And that involves the R03 data protection and determination form. And also we'll review the next steps webpage, which gives you more information and connects you to some resources on campus.
All right, and just to make sure we're all starting on the same page, just a few things to note ahead of our presentation. So IRB review does not apply when a project does not meet the federal definition of research and human subjects. So to be subject to IRB review and IRB oversight, a project both has to meet the federal definition of research and involve human subjects. The updated, the R03 data protection and determination form provides an option to obtain documentation, so a letter of determination, for projects that don't meet one or both of these definitions. So either projects that don't meet the definition of research or projects that do not involve human subjects can obtain a letter of determination through this process. We know that for our research community and individuals doing projects, it can be really important to have that documentation for publication purposes. We hear often that publications want to see that you've done your due diligence and confirmed with an IRB office that IRB review is or is not needed. So we've updated this process to facilitate that. And another sort of sticking point we hear from time to time, you may have seen that we updated WVU-KC. So previously, Flex and NHSR were combined as one in WVU-KC. So it was really two submission types encompassed in that Flex/NHSR. Those are two distinct paths that were available in WVUKC, but now it is Flex only. So anytime you're entering WVUKC and the IRB submission process, you are submitting to the IRB. So if you're entering there, you are seeking IRB review. Projects, so NHSR, or projects that don't meet the definition of research, we have pulled those out. To really reduce the confusion, sometimes we would hear NHSR Flex as one term, but we really want to make it clear that those are two distinct pathways. And by putting NHSR and projects that don't meet the federal definition of research in the determination tool, we hope to accomplish that. And then, as always, if a project does require IRB review, you have to get that prospectively. So IRB review and approval is required for human subjects research. So you're meeting both of those definitions. You need to get that review and approval prior to initiating your protocol, whether that be flex, exempt, expedited, full board, etc.
Thank you, Cassandra. So let's talk about the definitions. Now, these definitions are set forth in federal regulations published by the Department of Health and Human Services. And this is in 45 CFR 46, the common rule. And it is the set of regulations that governs IRB activities. So these are the two definitions that we use to determine whether a given activity does need IRB review. Research, as defined in these regulations, is considered a systematic investigation, including research development, testing, and evaluation, which is designed to develop or contribute to generalizable knowledge. You might notice that I stressed two phrases in that definition: systematic investigation and generalizable knowledge. Those are the two key tests that we use to determine whether a given activity constitutes research. Now, it's important to keep in mind that this is a very specific, narrow definition of research. This only applies in the context of these regulations and what needs IRB review. The word research can be used very differently depending on the field that you're in. And, we just want to reassure you and remind you that if you hear the term "not research" come from our office, we are solely speaking to these definitions and what needs IRB review. And it's not really an assessment of the value or validity of those activities. Now, once we know whether a project constitutes research, we'll then ask, does it involve human subjects? And the definition for human subjects is a little more complex than the definition of research. So a human subject is a living individual about whom an investigator conducting research either obtains information or biospecimen through intervention or interaction with them, or they obtain that private information or identifiable biospecimens without interacting with the individual and then analyze, use, or study those. It's very important to, to recognize that you don't have to speak with, intervene with, interact with an individual for them to be considered a human subject, as long as you are using their identifiable private information or identifiable biospecimens for research purposes. They still are considered human subjects. That can often be a point of confusion. So what are the IRB requirements? Well, the most basic part of this is that for an IRB review to be required, both of those definitions must be met by the project. So you have to meet the federal definition of research and you have to meet the federal definition of human subjects. If you don't meet one or the other, then it's either considered not research or not human subjects research, and therefore does not require IRB review. Now, we do have some resources listed here, and I believe Kylie has the PDF of our slides, so you will have access to these links. You can go to our Get Started page to get a stepwise process for how to get through IRB review, and it starts right up here with, do I need review? And then we also have a not research, not human subjects research info page, which has more detailed information. So if you have questions or you're trying to navigate this and aren't really sure, we do have resources available on our website. So again, keep in mind, if both of these definitions are met, you're hitting IRB review territory. So that includes flex, as Cassandra mentioned, exempt, expedited, and full board protocols. I know that visuals help me, so we have a little visual here to show you what needs IRB review. This black bar in the middle is our threshold for projects that do and don't need IRB review. So when we do look at projects, we're trying to figure out where they fall. We approach it in a very stepwise fashion. So as I mentioned before, the first question is always going to be, is this research? Does this meet that federal definition of research? And if it doesn't, well, it falls into what we call the not research category. It's, not a human subjects research project, and it falls below that threshold, so it doesn't need IRB review. Some very common examples of this include quality assurance and quality improvement projects, program evaluations, and both of these are intended to apply locally. You'll also see evidence-based practice, oral history here, and public health surveillance. One important thing to keep in mind with public health surveillance is that it must be conducted on behalf of or in conjunction with a public health authority or agency. So it can't just be I'm collecting information about a public health topic and publishing it. It needs to be working with a public health authority to improve and promote public health. So once we have this question of research figured out, let's say we're looking at a project and it does meet the definition of research. Well, our next step up is this human subjects research? Does this involve human subjects? Well, if it does meet the definition of research, but not the definition of human subjects research, that's not human subjects research. And examples that you'll find of this are decedent data. So if you're only looking at information about people who have died, then that's not considered a human subject, because if you remember from the prior slide, that definition, it specified living individuals. Another example is publicly available data, and that is just, the definition says private identifiable information is considered a human subject. So if it's publicly available data, then it doesn't qualify. And the other common example is a specific subset of secondary research, where researchers obtain information without any identifiers or any way to connect the information back to the individuals. So again, if you remember from that definition, we talked about private identifiable information. If it's not identifiable information, then it's not considered a human subject. Okay, so what happens when we do meet both of these definitions? Well, then we bump up over that threshold and we're looking at IRB review. And that's when we start asking the questions, does this meet flex criteria? And if not, does it meet exempt, expedited, or full board? So those are the 4 steps that come after the initial, are these activities research or human subjects? So again, we have some examples laid out here: quality improvement and assurance, program eval, evidence-based practice, decedent data, and publicly available data. We all kind of discussed on the prior slide. Those are considered not human subjects research or not research, and IRB review is not required. One additional type of project that we do see sometimes that fits in this bucket is case studies. And if you're doing a case study, you have just a very small number of subjects. That falls into the not human subjects research category, because generally with a very small number of subjects, it's not considered to be generalizable. But then we also have a few examples of things that you'll see for human subjects research. Very commonly, we will see retrospective chart reviews, and that would be chart reviews with anything more than 5 individuals. Clinical trials, of course, fall under this. Any surveys or interviews for research purposes are considered human subjects research, and any interaction or intervention conducted for research purposes. As far as surveys and interviews goes, one thing, it might not be as important for your group, but oral history projects do sometimes cross over into the research realm. If someone is, for example, planning to do a dual purpose project where they're collecting oral histories for documentation purposes, but they also want to analyze and examine those interviews to draw some kind of conclusion. Which brings us to our next slide. And I'll start by saying that methodologies can cross over between research and not human subjects research, and human subjects research. And often what really matters is the scope and intent of the project, specifically for quality assurance and quality improvement projects and program evals. We see a lot of, I'm not really sure where this falls. It usually comes down to the scope and intent of the project. So we did mention earlier that, there's going to be a point where PI decisions and PI evaluations come into play for this. And here's that point. It is and has always been the PI's responsibility to evaluate the project on the front end and make an initial determination of whether their project constitutes research with human subjects. We know that this can be difficult. It's not always clear cut. So of course we have the R03 data protection and determination tool that will help you, but you can also email us. Our irb@mail.wvu.edu inbox is manned. We keep an eye on that throughout the week. So normal business hours, we are, triaging those emails, making sure that they get the responses that they need. So please feel reassured that we're not just, it's not a black hole. It's not, your message isn't just going to go in there and disappear. We are keeping an eye on that and responding to your questions there. So again, it's critical that the PI evaluate this on the front end. Keep in mind that activities which, might or might not be research really can depend on the scope and intent of the project. And if you're not really sure, if it's not clear cut to you, reach out and ask us questions and we'll help you work through it. So, and one reminder, I know that NHSR and Flex are no longer tagged together in KC, but these are very different processes. And anytime that you have a not human subjects research or a not research project, no IRB reviews are required. You get that letter of determination and you're good to go. With Flex protocols, IRB review is always required, and you'll keep submitting those in KC because these projects do meet the definitions of both research and human subjects. It's important to keep in mind that conducting any kind of Flex study or protocol without IRB approval is considered non-compliance. So those submissions are continuing in KC. We haven't made any changes at all to the Flex process. One last reminder before I hand things over to Cassandra. If you're not sure, again, we really want you to reach out and contact us before you start your project. There are some of these that are going to be really clear cut. Like this is obviously a program evaluation. We're only using these results locally. This is obviously evidence-based practice. This is obviously a quality improvement program. We're only using these locally. Those, that's fine. You might not have questions and that's okay. If you do have questions, if you're not entirely sure if your project doesn't need IRB review, we do encourage you to reach out. And the reason is the IRB cannot provide any determination retrospectively for human subjects research. If you have started a human subjects research study without IRB approval, that's considered non-compliance. And depending on the type of project and what factors there are in the situation, it might result in required reporting to the Federal Office of Human Research Protections or even the FDA. We don't get a choice in those reporting scenarios. If we uncover something that has to be reported, we are required by federal regulations to do so. On that cheery and bright note, I'm going to hand things over to Cassandra and she can talk to you about some institutional requirements as well.
All right, thank you, Nancy. So hopefully now you have a better or more clear understanding of what needs IRB review and what does not. One of the reasons we also decided to transition projects that don't require IRB review outside of the system was, again, to draw that clear delineation. I'm entering the system, I'm seeking IRB review, I'm not entering the system, IRB review isn't required, but there are other institutional requirements for these projects. And so through this updated process, we hope to better connect project teams with those requirements so they can have a better understanding of expectation and what is needed. These have always been requirements, but we know that navigating and figuring out what those requirements are sometimes can be a challenge. So if you do go through this process, you will get a determination letter if your project doesn't need IRB review, with a link to next steps that will outline this, but we wanted to go through some of it in the presentation. So really want the takeaway to be that this process isn't the end all be all necessarily. It's not a permission slip, but really is a concurrence that IRB review isn't required, and then a connection to what is required. So for example, something to keep in mind is that the responsible entity may or may not be the university. We get a lot of submissions from the health system, and if you're conducting a quality improvement project, for example, in a unit on behalf of the health system, then the health system is the responsible entity. In contrast, if it's at the university for university purposes, the university is the responsible entity. And it's also something interesting, HIPAA may still apply. So for things like case studies, the expectation is to obtain a case study authorization form, but when that's not possible for whatever reason, you may request a HIPAA waiver for that project. And similarly, if you're working with decedent data, while IRB review isn't required, HIPAA regulations still apply 50 years past death. So there is a specific decedent HIPAA waiver request form that has to be completed. Similarly, data agreements may apply. So even if you're using a decedent data set or doing something with quality improvement, if there were to be any sort of data sharing, data agreement policies at the university would still be applicable to the project. And similarly with participant payment. So WVU has specific participant payment policies and ways that participants can be made, and that still applies to these projects. IT and compliant storage, of course, is still applicable. And for projects that do meet the definition of research, conflict of interest policies still apply. All right. And then for the current process, we're about a month and a week after our go live date. So we hope some of you have had the opportunity to use it, and we'll provide us feedback. But the update really was to capture only the information required that we need to make a determination that IRB review is not required. Like we've said, but I'll echo it again, the intention is to clearly delineate the difference between projects that do not require IRB review, so projects that don't meet the definition of research or don't involve human subjects, and projects that are subject to IRB review. This has also helped our office to dedicate resources to our federal mandate of overseeing human subjects research. And really, again, to clarify those institutional expectations, it's not just a one size fits all on the next page website. You'll see it's broken down by project type. So here are the expectations for quality improvement. Here are the expectations for program evaluation, case study, etc. It's really, the goal is to streamline the process for faculty, staff, and students so that they're able, again, to obtain that letter of determination, that concurrence that IRB review is not required for publication purposes. And this determination letter has more information than the letter IRB review not required that was previously provided in KC. So we do hope that it's beneficial to everyone at WVU, and do want to note that we're not trying to constantly change it, but it is still a work in progress. We've made some minor tweaks based on feedback and things that we've seen through its initial month. So if you do have questions about the form, whether it's, I'm not sure how to answer this question, or this is unclear, I would encourage you to reach out to me or Nancy directly, or again, email irb@mail.wvu.edu. Like Nancy said, that inbox is manned. So don't think that this is written in stone. We are certainly always open to feedback. And then just so you can conceptualize and think about the data protection and determination process, I'm sure many of you are familiar with what data protection was before in its previous iteration. Up until a month ago, the data protection certificate serves still to ensure that data is being stored appropriately and other institutional checks. But now there are sort of three paths that a project can go through once you enter the data protection and determination form. So first, if the project doesn't meet the federal definition of research, the data protection process will not be invoked because data protection is for research data. But you will continue through a stepwise process to categorize the project and then receive a letter of determination. Those are usually within 30 minutes, just depends on how all of the systems are working. And there are no prospective reviews. So we do monitor these on the back end. So you may hear from one of us after you submit if we have questions or concerns about how the form was filled out or just want some clarification. But it is an automated process. Again, institutional policies, that landing page is going to be really useful from the determination form to make sure that you're complying with other institutional policies. And then again, you will get a letter of determination rather than a data protection certificate. The second path is that if the project is research, so meets that federal definition of research, but does not involve human subjects, you will go through the full data protection process because while it's not human research data, it is still research data. So things like that subset of secondary use, decedent data. We actually have case studies go through this because typically the EMR is used and publicly available data. So you'll go through that, be a typical data protection process. So it could take a couple days, but you will end up getting a letter of determination, sort of a hybrid because it says letter of determination, but it has some of that data protection information on the bottom that's sent after approvals. And then the third path is the path that you all are probably most familiar with, is when it's human subjects research. You will go through the data protection process, obtain a data protection certificate, and submit that to the IRB with your IRB submission for review and approval. And you may have seen this, but we just wanted to provide some screenshots of what has been updated. So after you give your general information about the project, so things like the submitter, the title, the PI, the location, the added section is the project categorization and determination. And I know this will sound crazy and basic, but we really encourage you to read through all of the information in these questions and think very thoughtfully about your project. So like Nancy said earlier, the line between quality improvement, quality assurance, and research often comes down to scope. So quality improvement, quality assurance, yes, it should be locally implemented, but there are projects that are locally implemented that contribute to generalizable knowledge. There are projects that are locally implemented that are just to improve a local process. And we are not mind readers. So we really are leaning on you to read through and think about the purpose of the project and what you're doing. So similarly, some things that we've seen, it's a quality improvement project, but someone has indicated that it's not a systematic investigation. It probably is, but it's not going to contribute to generalizable knowledge because it's to improve a local process. So really, we've put some additional information. I know it looks like a lot of text, but it's to help guide your decision making. And we really put this at the forefront to make sure that individuals, project teams were thinking about the purpose of the project and whether it is human subjects research or research at this point or not. And that's another reason we broke it down, because that definition of research has two qualifiers. It has to be a systematic investigation and contribute to generalizable knowledge. So separating those to make sure that that meets both of those aspects to be research. So with those questions, one will appear. So if you answer no to are you conducting a systematic investigation, you won't see the second question. So that's why I've selected yes here. But so if the answer to one of these questions or both, you won't get to both, is no, then it doesn't meet the definition of research. You'll go through a few more questions and then ultimately receive that letter of determination. These are some examples of the questions. There's some logic, so we can't show all of the questions, but you can see the first question is it one of the not research categories that federal OHARP has laid out as not requiring IRB review. So things like oral history, if you're doing some journalistic activity or public health surveillance. Again, another area to really read through, like Nancy said, sometimes oral histories can transfer into the research realm. So if you're doing oral history research, you would have answered differently and not made it to this question. For journalistic documentary activities, we don't see a lot of this. I'm sure it certainly exists, but that would be a very uncommon selection in this form. And then for public health surveillance, I just want to reiterate what Nancy said, that needs to be with an agency, not just public health in general. So if it's none of the above, additional questions will show up. Also want to highlight that just in case that is a tripping point, that, you know, if you select none of the above, there will be additional options, and then it will walk through to categorize. So whether you're doing quality improvement, program evaluation, evidence-based practice, if it's a classroom activity that's only for classroom purposes, that is also captured within this framework. If you get to the end, you've said this doesn't meet the definition of research, but it doesn't fit any of these categories, please send us an email so we can figure out either and work through that unique scenario. I'm sure one exists that we haven't thought of, or identify, you know, sort of what went wrong. So one of those two scenarios, but please contact us and we will be more than happy to work through that. Okay, and then here's an example. If IRB review isn't required because it doesn't meet the definition of research, you'll get a letter. It will have the category of not research that your project has been identified as meeting, and have the project title, principal investigator, some of that basic information. You can see on the middle of the page the next steps, where you can go to the next step page to make sure, again, you're hitting those institutional requirements. And something I'll emphasize here is that since the not research determination is an automated process, again, we are monitoring it on the back end as a quality control initiative. These determinations are only as correct as the information you put in. So that's why, again, we really want to emphasize being thoughtful when you're answering the questions, contacting us if you're sort of on the fence. And if you get a determination and you think, I don't know, just reach out to us. But again, because it's all built on logic, it can only go by the information that it's provided. The next option is if you are conducting research. So yes, it's a systematic investigation. Yes, it will contribute to generalizable knowledge. You will go through the data protection process. Of course, at this point, it could either be not human subjects research or human subjects research. We've integrated the not human subjects research determination within questions that were in data protection. It's worked in throughout the process. And again, if it is NHSR, not human subjects research, you'll get a letter of determination. There's no IRB submission. If it is human subjects research, you'll get a data protection certificate that you can attach to your IRB submission in KC. And this is sort of that hybrid determination letter I was talking about. So you can see when it's not human subjects research, still has that category, so you know what category of not human subjects research it was determined to be, a link to the next step page, and then information that probably looks similar for anybody that's had a data protection certificate about medical record access, the applicability of HIPAA, those data variables, etc. All right, and then just some screenshots from the web page. Like I said, it's really tried to be organized on project type and differentiate. So NHSR categories and then projects that don't meet the definition of research. Some have overarching institutional requirements, and then it's delineated by type about additional requirements. So for example, in the decedent data collection, you can see additional institutional requirements that decedent HIPAA waiver form request, etc. And we can certainly navigate to that page and take a look, but we will also leave time for questioning if there are any questions. And we also have an FAQ page that Nancy's pulled up. So if you do ask us a question about this process, don't be surprised if that ends up being published here, because if one person is asking it, there are probably others that have the same question. And with that being said, does anybody have any questions at this time?
And feel free to put it in the chat if you don't already have the ability to do so, or unmute yourself.
We also understand that this might be, you don't have questions at this time, but as you go through the process, questions might come up. I think we've made it clear that you can contact us, but do want to reiterate that point that we are always available. No question too big, too small. We're really here to help and facilitate the process. Okay, I do see one question. Does the level of intervention using human subjects determine whether flex or expedited? Yes and no. So flex, we have a flex guidance document that outlines what can be reviewed as flex and what can't. So it's a category of IRB review that's used for non-federally funded research. So we are exercising our flexibility when federal agencies aren't funding it to apply equivalent protections. Some caveats, there's a whole laundry list. Let me see if I can, I'll put that flex guidance in the chat. But it can involve international research, can't be a clinical trial. So there are limitations in the flex category And then the next consideration would be, does it fit in exempt, which has specific categories? And then if not, can it fit in expedited, which again has specific categories? And ultimately, if it can't fit in any of those, it would go to the full board. And there's our Flex guidance document. Any other questions about this process or general IRB submission questions? We do appreciate you all attending today and your interest in this updated process. How often does the full board convene? We have 2 full boards, the blue and the gold board. Each meets once a month. So we have 2 full board IRB meetings monthly. And the IRB meeting dates and deadlines for submission for full board protocols can be found here. Other submission types, so if you're submitting flex, exempt, expedited, are reviewed on a rolling basis. So full board are the only ones, projects that have to go to the full board are the only ones beholden to those meetings. There's not a review board for flex protocols. They're reviewed on a rolling basis by an individual IRB reviewer. Similar to expedited and exempt. Typically they're screened and then we'll go to an IRB reviewer for review. Again, on a rolling basis. And I'll take this opportunity to say that even though they're reviewed on a rolling basis, please submit. Our office works, as fast as we can with, integrity and making sure we're doing our due diligence in reviewing. And review times are faster than the national average, but please do not count on that. So if you've had something reviewed quickly, be happy that it happened that time, but don't, plan on it the next time. The number of submissions varies, just depending, and we don't have any way to predict that. And they are just reviewed as they come in. One detail of the project can make the review, more complicated than before. So even what researchers might feel like is a minor detail change can be a significant change for the IRB review process. So we do encourage everyone to submit early. And based on these questions, sorry, I'm going to use this opportunity. If you want to learn more about the IRB process or just general questions, in addition to our Get Started page, we do have a learning center that's got some guides and documents and some videos, including one about submitting in WVU-KC. It's not hard to submit in WVU-KC, but I would also not say it is intuitive. So we do have a video about that, a video about informed consent, and other guides that may be helpful. Nancy developed a faculty advisor guide that's available, but it is also a good tool for early researchers navigating the IRB process at WVU. So I'd encourage everyone to check that out as well.